And we are back. Hello, board game brothers and sisters, and welcome to the first episode of 2025. I hope you had a fantastic holiday and a very happy new year, and I hope you missed me because I definitely missed you. And if you are new here, my name is Adam Singer, and we go over all the board games launching on all the different crowdfunding platforms each and every week, other than the holidays, which is pretty much the entire rest of the year. But before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about, and with a little bit of a break here, I do have a few that I have to go over here. The first one is that there is a new edition for the game Ark Nova. There's no launch date for this one just yet, but I expect it will be launching in the next few months, but I did want to mention it because this one is currently ranked number 3 on Boardgame Geek, and the name of this one is a little bit misleading because they're calling it Ark Nova 3 Edition, but they also say down here that this is not a new edition of the game, but instead it's going to be introducing a bunch of upgraded components created by the designer. There's not much information as to what those components might be, but given the name, a lot of people are speculating that this is going to be introducing some 3D components, specifically 3D tiles. If this game's a favorite of yours and you're looking to give it that terraforming Mars treatment, this is definitely one to look forward to. Like I said, no launch date for this one yet, but I will give you an update as soon as there is one announced. But as always, you can go ahead and find the campaign page over on Gamefound and follow along to get notified once it launches. Later this month, we also have a campaign that's going to be introducing brand new expansions to each one of the games in the South Tigris series, so if that is a series that you're a fan of, you can look forward to a bunch of new content launching on January 28th. I do have content on the channel covering each one of these games, but I'll get into more of the details on the expansion during the week of its launch, so if you do want to learn more about it, feel free to subscribe and I will have you covered during the week of the 28th. Also expected this month, we have the next campaign launching from Command Games, and this one's going to be Massive Darkness Dungeons of Shadowreach. And this one is going to be a brand new standalone edition of the game. So you don't need Massive Darkness 1 or Massive Darkness 2 in order to play this one, but if you have played them, I think this one will be introducing a few differences, which I will go over during the week of its launch. One other thing to note with this campaign is that it's also going to be introducing a TTRPG, so if you do want to take this into the RPG world, there is content that will allow you to do that. I'll have a ton more updates like these for you each and every week, so feel free to subscribe down below. But as usual, before we jump into the usual content, I do want to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because I do these videos every single week, but Alex and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns, and Alex posts a video at the start of each month letting you know of many of the games to come. If you're interested in that, he does already have his video up for the month of January, and he also has a ton of other great content as well. And if you didn't know, he also does run his own little convention, and this is known as a Level Up Retreat, and this is something that I have attended several times now, and it is always a ton of fun. What I really like about this one is that it's not like your typical convention where there are a bunch of booths and people trying to sell you things. Instead, this one is focused more purely on the games. You're going to be playing a ton of games, meeting a ton of cool people, and just having a ton of fun. And if you do actually end up making it out there, feel free to say hello because I will also be attending, along with a ton of other really cool people from the community. I'd love to see you there, and I'm always happy to play a game or just hang out. And if you do want to schedule this in, it is going to be happening between January 31st and February 2nd at the Delta Hotel in Woodbridge, New Jersey. I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to check it out, and definitely come out if you are able to. And that's everything I got for an intro, and we do have a few exciting games launching this week, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on January 7th, and this one is called Foxpaw. And this one is a competitive game that does take inspiration from books such as Harry Potter, because in this game, players are students in a school of magic, trying to increase their skills in the different types of magic, and also manage their grades and engage in different extracurricular activities in order to try and get the most victory points at the end of the game. The character that you play as well as the path that you choose to take for them, and the house that you get assigned to are all going to be adding variability into the game. And this is a worker placement game where each round players are going to be placing meeples out on different location spaces out on the board representing the different times of the day. The morning actions are going to be offering you instant bonuses, while the day and night actions are going to be resolved at the end of the round. And you always do need to take at least one night action, and you can choose to just go to bed early and get get better positioning for the following round, or you can try and take additional actions which can get you additional bonuses, but they do come with the risk of gaining darkness cards, which can cost you victory points at the end of the game if you're not able to get rid of them. The different actions can allow you to do all sorts of different things, like engage in duels with your fellow players. Whenever you do this, you're both going to be closing your eyes and then simultaneously revealing a pose with real wands that are provided in the game. If you do have any darkness cards, you can get rid of them at this point by choosing a pose outlined on that darkness card. So there are some incentives for you to choose different poses other than the different ways that they're going to interact with whatever your opponent chooses. And the duels do operate with a sort of modified rock, paper, scissors system, but what is really cool about this is that the outcome not only affects the people in the duel, but it can also affect the other players at the table as well. Some of the other actions will allow players to collect different mythical beasts, which they can also use to boost their actions in the future, but there's also actions that allow players to learn different spells or collect different resources, which they can use to fulfill different objective cards, or also prepare for different exams that are going to be periodically revealed throughout the game. These different exams are a main source of victory points in this game, so if you are able to figure them out in advance and then also prepare for them, that can put you in a much better position at the end of the game. But in order to do that, you might have to cheat or sneak around or even bribe some of the teaching staff in order to give you those insights that you're looking for. And of course, doing any of these nefarious actions are going to be gaining you darkness cards. Of course, everything does come a little bit easier if you have a more powerful wand and more powerful gear, and there are actions that allow you to acquire those as well. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds until all of those exams are completed and players tally up all their victory points. And then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And also launching on January 7th, we have a new expansion for the game Darwin's Journey, and this one is the Oceania expansion. This is going to be adding a bunch of new content that you can mix into the game, but it's also going to be introducing a couple new mechanisms as well, which I will get back to in a second here, because if you are not familiar with the original game, this is a really solid Euro game where players are going to be placing workers in order to take various actions. But what is really cool about the way that the worker locations work in this game is that in order to use a location, two things need to be true. That location needs to be purchased by any player at the table, which is indicated by the lenses here, but then also the worker that you place there needs to have the appropriate seals that are also indicated on that location. What's even more interesting about that is that each player is going to have their own player board where they're going to be putting their different workers, with each worker being associated with these rows of spaces beside them. And as you play throughout the game, you're going to be acquiring new seals, and you'll decide where you want to assign those within those rows, essentially adding more seals and specialties to the various workers, which will expand the different locations that they might have access to. This is a really fun mechanism, and the game itself is really well designed. It does seem like a lot when you first crack open the rulebook, but once you play this a single time, things really flow really well and everything makes sense. And because it's so intuitive, it really does minimize the amount of frustration or overhead or fiddliness that you might experience with typical Euro games in this weight class. I guess I would classify this as just a really elegant design, and that is one of the reasons that it is still in my collection today, and it's also the reason why this one is my own personal pick of the week. But there's a bunch of different actions that you can take in this game, and you might have noticed this map at the bottom of the board, and this doubles as a place for players to sail their ships and take various actions and explore the different islands, but it also acts as the timer for the game because there is going to be a boat sailing across the bottom here, and once it reaches its final destination, it's going to be triggering that final round. You also don't want your own personal boat to fall too far behind that round checker boat because that can cost you victory points throughout the game, so of course there are action locations that allow you to sail your boat forward, and this not only keeps you up or even ahead of that round tracker boat, but you can also choose to move through different spaces that can grant you bonuses, and moving past certain spaces also grants you access to the other islands, and it is always nice to get there first because you will have first dibs on the different options and resources there. When you reach islands, you can camp there and drop off different explorers, and there's different actions that allow you to do that, and you can also discover different flora and fauna on these islands, which you can also log using other actions in order to gain money throughout the game and victory point multipliers at the end of the game. Players will also have stacks of stamps on their own personal player boards, which they can use actions to move onto these different envelopes here, and this works as an area majority where at the end of each round you're going to be checking these and seeing which players have the most stamps in those different spaces and getting the appropriate rewards. Of course, there's also actions that allow you to get more of those seals, which you can then assign to your workers to gain access to more locations, and there are also some special action locations which can be randomized every single game, and they can offer a whole variety of unique effects. Another thing that I really like about this game is that there's all sorts of different spaces out on the main board or on your personal board that if you're able to either uncover or cover up those spaces, you're going to be getting whatever reward is outlined on it. For example, placing out your camps will allow you to gain the bonus next to that specific camp token, or placing out all the stamps in a particular stack will unlock the bonus next to that stack. Players will also start the game with a few different objective cards, and you can try to complete those to earn their bonuses, and there are also different objective tiles that will be appearing throughout the game, and if you're able to complete those, you'll actually be placing them onto your own personal player board, unlocking any of the powers that you decide to put those tiles on. Players will also want to keep an eye on the different round bonuses, which are outlined and randomized on tiles at the bottom of the board, and these are going to be rewarding victory points at the end of their respective round based on the requirement that is outlined on that tile. And that's pretty much everything there is to Darwin's Journey, but there are some existing expansions and mini expansions included in the core game. But of course, we're here to learn about the new expansion. And this introduces a bunch of new content for pretty much every aspect of the game, including new flora and fauna, and even including a new map with new islands that have different features like camps that all the players can use, and even different locations where you're going to be putting randomized action tiles, and in order to gain access to that action, you need to reach that location with one of your explorers. There's also new valuables that you can discover on these maps, like stamps that are worth twice the value when you're checking for area majority, or even gold coins that can pay an entire cost of something with just that single coin. But the biggest change this new expansion introduces into the game is the concept of hazards, and these are going to be outlined on different components and also on different tokens that are going to be scattered throughout the different islands. Every time you move over one or acquire a token with that icon, you're going to be moving up the hazard track, which is going to be associated with some sort of negative consequence that gets resolved at the end of each round. The problem with moving up this track is that you're going to have to deal with that consequence multiplied by your current position on that track. This, of course, can be very costly, but there is a small silver lining here because each one of these consequence tokens are also going to have a specific reward associated with them, and whoever is the furthest ahead on that track at the end of the round is going to be able to take advantage of that reward. But if you'd rather not risk it, there are different actions and locations that can grant you antidotes, which you can use to move down that track. Of course, the new expansion also comes with new player boards, which will have new special abilities that you can unlock, and many of them are going to be taking advantage of the new mechanisms that the expansion does introduce into the game. If all that sounds interesting to you, I definitely do recommend checking this one out, if not for the expansion, but at least for the base game. And this one is available on Tabletop Simulator if you do want to try it before you buy it, which I always do recommend, and I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below, and of course you can click that button to get notified once it launches. Also launching on the 7th, we have Golem Run, and this one is a really interesting one because not only is it a competitive trick-taking game, but it's also a betting and racing game, because at the start of this game you're going to be setting up a modular board and then putting the different colored golems on that board, with each of the golems corresponding to a color of one of the suits. 12 cards are going to be dealt to each player, and then each player is also going to be choosing 3 of those cards in order to make various bets. You're going to be betting on which golem you think is going to win, and also by how much, but then you can also bet on which golems you think your neighbors are betting on. Players are then going to be taking turns playing cards into tricks, and the way that the trick taking works in this game is that you're either going to be playing a card or multiple cards of the same value. You don't have to follow suit in this game, you just have to play the highest card or highest set of cards in order to win that trick. And if you do, the golem or golems that match the suit of the cards that you played to win that trick are going to be the ones that move ahead on the track. The track's going to have different terrain and iconography on it that indicates how the golems can be moved, and you're going to have to move the golems within those restrictions. This is a really interesting concept because this means that this is a trick-taking game where you're more concerned with which colors are in a winning trick, rather than who is the one to actually win that trick. Of course, winning a trick does grant you with more control, but you're only going to want to do that if you are winning the trick with the colors that help you. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds until one of the golems reaches the finish line, and then players are going to be revealing their bets, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also on the 7th, we have Hyperstar Run, and this one is the next game coming from the publisher Button Shy Games, along with the designer Scott Elms, who always do a great job working together, and this one is another solo game that I think looks like a ton of fun, and Button Shy does have a history of sending me prototypes, but Canada Post has been on strike for the past few months, so I'll do my best with what I have, and I was able to find a good image of the game over on Instagram from Tabletop Reviews, so shout out to them, and you can go ahead and check them out and see what they had to say about the game. But this is a card game where you're thematically trying to complete the last level of your favorite video game. This final level is going to be represented by a row of 9 to 12 cards depending on the difficulty that you want to play on, and each of these cards are going to have a few enemies outlined on them, and you're going to have to defeat any one of those enemies in order to move through that card. You might have noticed that these cards have a special ability as well as an icon in the top left corner, and also icons above the various enemies, and this specific card also has this band running through the center of it, which I will explain in a moment here. But first, I'll explain what these different icons represent, and these represent the different button presses that you're going to be using in order to play this game. The icons above the enemy represent the button presses you need in order to defeat that enemy, and the icon in the top left corner represents a button press that you have access to when that card is in your hand rather than in that main row. So yes, these cards are multi-use, and after you've set up that initial row of cards, you're going to be taking 3 of the remaining cards and adding those into your hand, and then also taking the 2 equipment cards, which you will always be starting with. After you've done that, you're ready to start the game, but one thing I should mention is that when you're putting out this initial row of cards, you're actually putting those cards face down, so you don't actually know which enemies you're going to be going up against in which order, and it's really valuable to know which cards have these bands running through the center of them, because if you are able to get them side by side, then that's going to allow you to perform combos, making the enemies more easy to defeat in the following card. But like I said, all these cards do start face down, and then you're going to be using this card above the row in order to indicate where your character currently is. The reason this card's broken into 4 different sections is because this is not an easy final level, and you're not going to be able to complete it with just a single life. This is thematically a video game, so each one of these sections represents an extra life that you have for your character, and you will need them to complete this game. When you start the game, you're going to be revealing the leftmost card in the row, and then you're going to be trying to spend the cards in your possession in order to defeat one of the enemies on that card. If you're able to do that, then you can move on to the next card, revealing it and trying to defeat the enemies on that card. The issue here is that whenever you spend any of these cards to defeat an enemy, those cards are then exhausted from your hand, and the only way that you can get them back is by spending one of your extra lives. This means that as you're moving through these cards, eventually you're going to run into a situation where you're just not able to defeat any of the enemies. Luckily, fighting these enemies isn't your only option, because you can also choose to activate the ability of the card that you are currently at. Doing this does also cost you a card, but luckily it doesn't matter which card you choose, so you can just activate abilities by using the cards that are the least valuable to you. Another important detail is that the cards in your hand are not your only source of button presses, because you can also use any of the button presses from any of the cards that you have made it past. If you choose to use any of those cards for their icons, then you're just going to be sliding that card down to indicate that it's been used. When it gets to the point where you need to use one of your extra lives, not only do you get all the cards that you've spent back into your hand, but you also get to slide any of these cards back up, and also you're going to be taking the leftmost card from the row and then adding that card to your hand. Unfortunately, using your extra life does also send your character back to the start of that row, but since you were able to take that leftmost card and add it into your hand, that row is actually going to be shorter each time that you do this. Not only that, but since you were able to flip some of the cards up in your previous life, you're going to have a little bit of information that you can use to your advantage to be a bit more efficient with your next life. This is where the abilities can become really powerful, because a lot of these abilities will allow you to move cards around and manipulate that row, and if you already know which card is in which spot, you can use all of that to your advantage to try and get these combos next to each other and make moving through the row the next time a little bit easier to do. If you're able to do this well enough and make it through all of the cards, then you have won the game, but if you run out of all of your lives before you're able to do that, then you're going to be losing and you're going to have to start again from the beginning. Really like what I'm seeing with this one, and if you do too, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 7th, we have Micro Hero Hercules, and this one is a solo deck building game where you're going to be playing through 12 rounds, with each round representing one of the 12 labors that Hercules needed to go up against to prove himself. You'll begin the game with your starter deck of cards, but then you'll be able to gain experience points in order to improve your abilities, upgrade your cards, and then use those to overcome the different mythological foes. Most of the 12 labors are going to have Hercules going up against some sort of mythological beast, and you're going to have to get their health down to 0 in order to complete that labor. Defeating them allows those cards to be turned into blessing cards, which you can then add to your arsenal in order to complete future rounds. The issue is that as you're taking damage throughout these rounds, you're going to be adding more and more wound cards into your deck, and if you get overwhelmed with those wound cards, that can cost you the game before you're able to complete all 12 rounds. I don't have too much more info on this game, so if you do want to learn more about it, definitely feel free to check out their campaign, and I will have that linked in the description below. Also on the 7th, we have Runefire, which is a reimplementation of the game Dragonfire, which, if you're not familiar with, is a card game where players are going to be playing as different characters with unique starting decks, and then you're going to be choosing an adventure that you want to play through, which is going to be broken into a number of scenes. Each adventure also specifies which monsters are included in its specific encounter decks, and then every scene throughout the adventure, you're going to be drawing a card from that encounter deck to each one of the players. Then you're going to be playing over a series of rounds until all of those encounter cards have been resolved. Players will be playing cards from their decks in order to deal damage and cause other effects, often requiring different skill checks where you're going to be drawing an additional card to see whether that skill check was a success or failure. The nice thing about the way that damage is dealt in this game is that as players are all contributing to a total amount of damage, you can decide to which encounter cards you want that damage to be directed at. This allows the players to function more as a team rather than just focusing on the monster in front of them. The issue here is that after all the damage is dealt, any of the undefeated enemies are then going to attack the player that they are in front of. If this happens multiple times sequentially, that monster can actually knock you out and then move on to the next player clockwise. This is a deck building game, so of course you can purchase new and more powerful cards, and what is really nice about this is that when you purchase a card, it doesn't go into your discard pile, but instead it goes directly into your hand, ready for use immediately. But the rounds continue until all of the enemies are defeated, and once that's the case, players are going to be going into a short rest phase where each player is going to be healing 1 point of health, and then you can optionally buy an additional card, then you're going to be moving into the next encounter. Of course, I am filming this before the campaign launches, so there's not a whole lot of info on how Runefire differs from the original Dragonfire, so I've just been telling you how Dragonfire plays. I imagine this is going to be very similar, but of course there will be a few small changes and tweaks, and probably some improvements to the rules as they are innovating on an existing system. If you do want to learn about all that and check it out for yourself, I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below, and of course you can click to get notified once this one launches. These next few games I have actually covered at some point in the past, so I'm just going to briefly mention them and then roll you the previous footage. But the first one is Nova Roma, and it looks like this new campaign is just going to be introducing the game in a few different languages. Doesn't look like there's a whole lot different from their original campaign, but this one is a worker placement game from the designer Stan Kordonsky, who has quite a few really excellent games out already. And if you do want to learn more about how this one plays and you didn't catch my previous footage, I'll just go ahead and roll that for for you now. And this is a competitive Eurogame where players are going to have 3 workers that they're going to be placing out onto the board in order to perform different actions. But the interesting thing about the way that the actions work in this game is that there's actually a grid of actions, and players are going to be putting their workers into one of the spaces within that grid. That's going to allow the player to take 2 actions, the one that's in their column and the one that's in their row. But something that's really cool adding on to this is that at the start of every single round, the Emperor is going to be moving to a random space within that grid. And if that Emperor or another one of your own workers is in that column or row of the actions that you're going to be taking, you're actually going to get a more powerful action, upgrading it once for each one of those meeples that are within that intersection criteria. And the different actions that players can perform are to visit the market in order to buy or sell goods or cards, gain an upgrade tile that's going to gain them a special ability as well as influence, gain follower cards which come with their own abilities or scoring potential, bet on a chariot track. There's a few different chariots and they're going to be moving up throughout each round, and players will be able to bet on which one they think will be in the lead in order to gain victory points for that. But each player will also have their own set of ships located in the ship region of the board. You're going to be moving those around in a bit of a race because the first to get to the end of that ship track is going to be getting special bonuses, but you'll also be gaining any of the bonuses that you cross over when you move that ship. But this game is called Nova Roma, so of course players can pay to build buildings and help develop Nova Roma. And the way that that works is that there's a few different regions in a Nova Roma map, and you'll be able to choose to build in those different regions depending on how many times you're able to upgrade that action. And when you do perform that action, you're going to be placing your colored cubes anywhere within the available region's grid, and that's going to be earning you victory points at the end of the game, as well as special bonuses if you're able to encapsulate the special icons located in those grids. But there isn't just the main player board that players are going to be concerned with, because each player also has their own personal board, and there is an action to be able to interact with that board, and that's the Gain Artisans action. And whenever you do that, you're going to be gaining an artisan meeple that you'll be able to add to your board, and your board also has a grid on it. It works the exact same way, so wherever you put that artisan meeple, you'll be able to gain whatever is in the column and the row of that grid, depending on where you decide to place it. But the difference here is that instead of this grid granting you actions like it does in the main board, it's going to be gaining you resource generation. So there's going to be a whole bunch of different resources in each row and column, and if you put multiple of these artisans in the same row, that does get powered up as well, gaining you more and more of those resources. And of course, players are going to be trying to use and optimize these actions in order to build their own little engine and gain the most victory points. But there is also a personal objective boards that each player is going to have, and these are going to have all sorts of different goals that you can try to complete in order to gain different benefits and resources, or they can also gain you victory points at the end of the game. These are going to come as their own separate cards, so these can actually be different from game to game, adding some more variability each time you play the game. And of course, the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and you can find links to this campaign in the description below. On the 10th, we have Ion Core, which I also covered in the past, but I didn't have a whole lot of info when I originally covered that. It looks like there's a bunch of new videos out on that since then, including one from Meg over at Boardgame Co., so definitely feel free to check those out if you do want to learn more. But like I said, I did cover this one briefly with the information I had, so I'll just quickly roll that previous footage for you now. This one is a sandbox game that takes place in a dystopian future where humanity was driven to piracy. Players are each going to be sailing a ship across a dystopian sea filled with all sorts of hazards and monsters. And it also looks like each player is going to have their own character with a bunch of different spaces for different upgrades and storage, and also the ability to form different allegiances. I can't say for sure how the combat works in this game, but if I was to guess, it looks like it's done through simultaneous reveal of different cards, either against other players or against different aspects of the game. Like I said, not a whole lot of info on this one, but if you do want to check it out, I will have it linked in the description down below. This next one is also launching on the 10th, and this one is called A Few Good Nights. And although I did film this one already, I never actually posted it because I thought this was launching a couple months ago, but then it got postponed until now. So I do already have the footage, I've just never aired it. So I'll just go ahead and edit that really quickly for you and post it up and share it with you now. And this one is a competitive dice rolling game where players are competing to gain the most gold and mana at the end of the game. The way the game works is that on your turn, you're going to be choosing 7 different dice to roll, and there's 3 different dice that you can choose from, with each of them granting you higher and higher rewards, but also coming with some risk because some of the more powerful dice are going to have more deadly types of dangers that may be rolled and that you'll have to deal with. There's different monsters that can inflict a different amount of damage towards you, but then there's also bombs that can inflict damage to you, but also an amount of damage to every other player. But what you're actually trying to do when you roll these dice is to get gems of the same color, because when you create sets of matching gems, that's going to be granting you with some amount of gold and mana, and also possibly some other benefits. The more dangerous dice can give you multiple gems on a single side and can also give you multipliers. You do also get one free reroll per turn to roll any amount of dice that you'd like in order to try and get those sets that you're looking for, but this does come with the issue that you're not allowed to re-roll any of the dice that show any type of danger. Luckily for you, there is a way that you can mitigate this, because at the start of your turn you can actually buy various items, gear, and potions from the market. You're going to be buying items with your gold, and then you're buying potions with your mana. These different cards can allow you to heal yourself, get some additional rerolls, reroll some of those dice you normally wouldn't be able to, or even fight back against the monsters, getting rid of those dice completely. One thing you do have to be aware of is that you can only equip one piece of armor to each of your armor slots, so you'll want to be trying to diversify the armor that you get to gain the most benefit as possible. One other thing you can buy from the market, and you do also start with one of these, is the gamble cards. And these are really cool because anytime that the combination of gems are rolled, either on your turn or anyone else's, you can cash in that gamble card to get that amount of money. But this is a game that plays over a series of rounds that each represent a day, and each round is broken into 3 phases that all pretty much play very similarly to each other, and they're going to be playing exactly like how I just described, with each player rolling those dice and trying to get those sets of gems. But the last phase of each day is, of course, the night phase, and this is the one that's most different from the others, because during the night there is twice the damage, but there's also twice the rewards. For some of the less brave knights, there is also the option to forego the night phase in order to just heal up some of your health. But if you do happen to just roll terribly, or you just pushed your luck a little too much, there is also the option once per day that you can retreat from any of your rolls, which will allow you to avoid that damage, but you will also lose any of the gems that you rolled, and you will still also get an amount of damage equal to the current round. But if a player rolls particularly well, or if they have some specific items, they can also earn something called a boon token. And these are really nice to have because they can essentially give you a free action, and you can just trade them in order to do things like reroll any 2 of your dice, heal and gain mana, or even force another player to reroll any 1 die. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game, based on their gold and mana, wins the game, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And that is everything I got for the first week of 2025. No giveaways just yet, but we are just getting started here, and this first month is going to be a bit of a hectic one for me because I do have the level up retreat at the end of the month. Definitely would love to see you there, but then I do also have a fishing trip planned to fish for marlin in Punta Cana. Not really sure how I got roped into that one, but it'll definitely be interesting. But I'm going to try and get as much of my filming done earlier in this month for the games that I am aware of, to try and reduce the amount I need to worry about during my travels. I did actually make a big dent in my to-do list over the holidays, so hopefully I can keep that up. I'm looking forward to a bit more freedom, a bit more fun, and a lot more games here in 2025. And I wish you all the same, and I hope it's been a great start to the year so far. But until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
Oh.